Hey there everyone, and welcome to Bill's Retro Gaming Show. I've got my GRS control panel on my iiRcade system, got my Game On graphics on there to complete the look. There was only one thing missing, and now that is set up too, and that is my GRS iiRcade KVM system. That's all set up now, and I'm going to go over a little bit of that for you guys right after this. All right, everyone, thanks so much for checking out today's video. Of course, what we're talking about is the GRS iiRcade KVM system. Yes, it's a mouthful, but basically what we're talking about is the new brain and guts for your iiRcade system. This is the system from GRS and Thunderstick Studios that will allow you to not only continue to use your iiRcade system as it came, but switch over to the GRS Viper board and allow you to play your own games and different things on that as well. Now, this is not meant to be a comprehensive guide to this new system. For instance, I have not done any kind of install video or anything on this. I think Glenn GRS has done a great job with his videos on how to install this in the original iiRcade or the iiRcade Gold like mine. Definitely check out his videos. I'll try to link to those in the description below. But what I do want to do in this video is just kind of go over my experience so far with the system. I've had it set up for a little over a week. Recently did an upgrade to it. They just released the latest version of the software for it. I will show you that install process as the video goes on. So that's definitely something you want to do. But like I said, I want to touch on some of the things that I like, some of the things that I don't like about it that I'd like to see change on it. Like I said, some of the experiences, some things that I've noticed that maybe will help you guys out with yours as well. Now, again, this is not meant to be comprehensive. I am not an expert when it comes to GRS Viper or arcade or things like that. For that, one of the things you should absolutely do is join the Retro Center Discord. They have a section in there for GRS Viper and iiRcade in general and different things. And it's been a great resource for me and others on how to get things up and running with your system. But let's dive in and let's get started. First off, let's talk about the latest install and how to update your system if you haven't done it yet.
All right, so going into the main menu, one of the things you can see here down at the bottom is it says Arcade Emulation Station version 2.0.1. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to update my system to the latest version, which is 2.0.3. So from the main menu, I'm going to go down to System Settings. So going to here, down at the bottom, you will see it says Check for Updates. And now it's going to look for an update, and it says that there is a file system upgrade available. You already have a previous system backup saved. System backups can take 1.5 hours to complete. Do you want to create a backup now? You can choose yes or no here. If you say yes, it is going to take a good hour to an hour and a half to back up your system. I believe it's backing it up to the cloud. Otherwise, if you say no, I believe it will take you directly into downloading the upgrade and doing it. I'm going to choose yes to create the backup and come back and check on this later, because like I said, it does take a good hour and a half. So if you're going to do this, go grab yourself some lunch, go do something else, wait for it to back up, and then come back to finish the update. So once it's done doing the backup, you will get this message. Do you want to download the upgrade now? So select yes to download and continue the upgrade. Now it'll take a minute or so for the upgrade to download. Once it's done, you'll get this message. The upgrade is ready. It will be installed on the next reboot. Reboot and upgrade now. If you say yes, it will reboot your system and install the upgrade. If you say no, then it will wait and do it the next time you reboot. So I'm going to select yes to finish the upgrade. So once you do that, the system will reboot and install the upgrade. Just leave it alone and let it do its thing. And once everything is done, you should get this message: the previous upgrade installed successfully. All right, and there you go. Going back into the main menu now, you can see that it says Arcade Emulation Station version 2.0.3, which at the time of recording is the latest version. So if you haven't done this yet, or if you wanted a refresher on how to upgrade your arcade system, this is how you do it.
All right, so now that that's out of the way and you've got your system updated to version 2.0.3, let's talk about some things going on with this. Now, one of the first things, obviously, I want to mention, a lot of people know about this already, is the fact that this allows you to switch, of course, between the original iiRcade board and the new GRS Viper board, and that's handled very simply with this button right here. By pressing on the right side, it will go to blue and get you right back to your iiRcade system with whatever games and things you had set up on there. And of course, this continues to work as it always did. There's really no change to the iiRcade side on here. And with a simple switch on the left side, the button goes green and you're back to your GRS Viper system. All right, so the next thing I want to do is just scoot around to the back of my iiRcade system and show off the KVM board for a minute. There's a couple of things there that I just want to point out to you guys so that you're aware of it when you're setting this up, when you're getting ready to play with the new system. All right, so real quick, you're looking at the back of my iiRcade system. I've been leaving this open just so I could get access to it for a little bit. I will eventually close this up and have the power cables and everything coming out the back. But I wanted to leave it open at least while I was getting ready to do this video so I could show off a couple of things to you. Of course, this is the GRS Viper KVM system. I've got it very precarious here just so I can show a couple of things real quick and then I'll lie it flat again. But there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out to you guys, especially if you're setting this up for the first time. One of the first things that you want to look at is this right here. You'll see this little knob right there. That is the potentiometer for the volume. And that's something you're going to want to play with to get it dialed in just right, because while you will be able to change the volume on the iiRcade side with the volume up and down buttons, the volume up and down buttons do not work on the arcade side. You can do that through the system menu. I'll show that off as I go through. But what you're going to want to do is get this to a good level. Just dial that into a good level. Not full. You don't want it too full. Because I think it's going to be too powerful for the speakers, and I'll talk about that a little bit more too. But get it to a level you're comfortable with, and then you can kind of set the volume on the software side from there. And the other thing I want to point out is right here. You can see where my finger is. A lot of people have wondered where you would put an SD card for this. Now, this does come with one. I believe the one it came with was 32 gig. I swapped that out for a 512 so that I had plenty of room for stuff on there. The nice thing is, first time you turn this on and get it all set up, it will format the 32 gig that it comes with. It will set up the folder configuration on there. So all you have to do if you want to swap it out is just mimic that folder configuration on your own card. I just copied it to my computer and then copied it to the new SD card, and then I could put whatever games or whatever things I want on there. And of course, you can do that over the network from your PC as well, so you don't have to keep taking the SD card in and out. But I wanted to point those two things out because I have seen a lot of comments online on the Discord and different things with people asking about those two things, specifically the SD card and exactly where it is. So I wanted to take a minute and point that out, and then we will get back to the front of the unit. All right, so now we're back around to the front, and what I'm going to do is just take a few minutes and point out a couple of things to you guys, maybe play a few games, show off how the system works. Again, if you have questions, if you have concerns or things that you're running into with your system that aren't covered in this video, please go ahead and join the Discord, join some of the Facebook groups, because there's a lot of people on there, especially the experts who built this thing, who can definitely help you out. Of course, always feel free to leave me comments. I love getting your guys' comments, but there's probably going to be a lot of questions that I'm not going to be the right person to ask and not going to be the one to answer. So I want to cut that off as quickly as I can, point you guys to the right source so you make sure you get your questions answered and you get them answered properly. Now let's dive in. So of course, this is the iiRcade system. You can see as you move back and forth, you'll get to different areas for different games and things. But the first thing that I want to do is focus on the main menu. And if there is one comment that I would like to make right up front is I wish they would set up the menu button on the control panel to just jump you right to the main menu wherever you are here instead of having to scroll all the way back and get to it. It would be a quick time saver sometimes to be able to just jump to the main menu. But barring that, we're here. I'm going to hit the A button to get into it, and you can see there's a lot of different settings here. Now, I will tell you that I have not done anything really with NetPlay or anything online, so I'm not really going to cover that in this video, but know that it is an option. There are some ways that you can actually play people online. It's just not something that I've had a chance to check out for myself yet. But one of the first things I do want to point out is this, and this is the system settings and the audio settings here. Now you can see the system volume here. I've got it set to 90%. You can scroll up and down on this, set it to whatever you want. So as I was saying earlier, you're going to want to take that volume knob in the back and put a little flathead screwdriver in there and just turn it, dial that into what you think is a decent level. And then in the arcade, you're going to have to come here to set the volume. There's no way, unfortunately, to set it while you're playing or anything like that. They haven't got that handled yet. Now, eventually, from my understanding, is they are working on an update so that the up and down volume buttons on the control panel will work to change this. But for now, this is where you would have to go to set the system volume. And once you set it, it's set. I mean, you can always come back to it and do it at any time, but you can't kind of change it back and forth as you're playing. Now, another area you might want to check out are the video settings right here. You can set the max resolution for the arcade itself. You can set the default game at max resolution. I have these turned all the way up to 1280 by 1040. You can set these to pretty much anything you want. And of course, you can also set this per system, per game. I'll show that off as well. But just find the resolution that you think works best for you. And one final thing real quick before I get out of the system settings and start talking about some of the individual games and things like that is there is a section here for accessory settings. Of course, those of you who maybe want to set up a bit LCD or Pixelcade or things like that, that's where you'd come for this. But what I really want to point out first off is this, the gate restrictor enabled. This is something that you should absolutely make sure is turned on because you will be able to set this up per game if you want to have it automatically activate the gate restrictor, have it go from an 8-way joystick to a 4-way joystick or vice versa. So it's a great feature to have. Of course, you can always do it with the button that is on the control panel itself, but to have it do it automatically is a pretty cool feature. And also in the main arcade menu, you will see something here that says refresh all games list. One thing to keep in mind is if you are adding games to this, whether you're swapping out your SD card, putting games directly on the SD card, copying them over the network. One of the things you'll want to do is anytime you add more games to this, you're going to want to come in here and hit that and have it refresh the games list for you so it makes sure that it picks up any new games you've added. Now, if you use the downloader option in the system, it will do that for you automatically. This would just be if you are putting games yourself on the SD card or on an external drive or copying them over the network. You're going to want to refresh the games list before the system will see any new games you've added. All right, so for me, while I do have a few console games on here, Dreamcast, I've got a few NES and Super NES games, mostly light gun games. I'll get to that in a little bit. My main focus right now is arcade games. I want this to be more of a multi-arcade machine, so much than having a ton of console games on here. I have so many other ways to play console games and different things that I don't feel like I need to have them so much in an arcade format. But that's just me personally. Of course, obviously, you see here, there's Game Boy Advance, there's DOS, there's Thomas Wave, you've got, which is more arcade, of course. You've got PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, you can get Genesis games on here, any of those. So if you want to play console games on here, certainly, by all means, you can go ahead and do that. But what I want to do is just show up a couple of things here. Like I said, focusing mostly on MAME. I think a lot of what I'm going to show off is the same for just about any gaming system on here. But I do like the arcade games. I do like MAME. You can see here that there's two different things right now. So there's The Adventures of Robbie Roto, which is a game that it comes with. That's actually stored on the internal memory. If I had any games on the internal memory of the Viper, they show up right away when I go in here. Instead, I've got an SD card plugged in, and that's what you see here. So if I go to this, now you'll see all the games that I have put on my SD card. So on the control panel, all the way to the right, the button right next to the switcher for the iiRcade and Viper is the little coin button. If I hit that, that's going to get me into options, and you can see there's a bunch of things here. So a few things that I do want to point out. So you have system options, and this is going to be system-wide for all of the games that I have under this particular emulator, MAME. You can see here one of the things is there are multiple versions of MAME and even FB Neo here, so you can choose the emulator that you want to be the default for all of the games under this category. I'm sticking with the this one, MAME 2003 Plus. It seems to have the most compatibility, although that's not always the case. You can pick your default resolution. Right now I have it at 1280 by 1024, but you can see there are other options here. Now, most of the games are in zip files that I have. You can choose to have it extract the archives. You can have it never do it, to always do it, or to ask you each time. If you say ask, then every single time you launch a game, it's going to ask, do you want to extract the archive? For MAME, it seems like just running them straight in the zip file is the right way to go. So I have this set to never. Depending on the system, whether it's MAME or Daphne or Dreamcast or whatever, that might be a little bit different. So there is a little bit of trial and error to figure out what's the best option. And game list view style is just how it shows up on screen as you're going through the games menu. I just have it for automatic here, but there's a basic view, which I don't think shows you a lot of information about each particular game, just shows a list of games. There's a detailed view, there's video and grid. I'm not going to go through all of those, but you can play around with those and see which viewpoint you like better. Now, as I said, system options are going to be system-wide. They're going to be the defaults for any game, but you've also got game options where you can put in some overrides if you like. For instance, if a particular game doesn't run under your default emulator, which again is, for me, is MAME 2003 Plus, you might have to pick a different one. And I found that this is true for a handful of games. There are a few games that did not run under this emulator. So bumping it down to 2003 or even to newer ones like 2010, 2015, or 2016 would allow the game to run. And whatever I set here is going to be just for the particular game that I'm on. Same thing with game resolution. You can override the default game resolution. Player one device, you can pick the device that you want it to be, light gun, mouse, so on and so forth. This is one really cool feature here. This enabled gate restriction on or off. Now, what's cool about this is if you turn this on, it will automatically set the game restrictor every time you start the game. So instead of it being set up as an 8-way joystick, it's going to automatically put on the gate restrictor and turn it into a 4-way joystick. So you just have up, down, left, and right. All right, so moving the camera down slightly, that's this button here. This is your gate restrictor. When it's red like this, it's set up for an 8-way joystick. If I hit the button there and turn it to blue, that's going to turn it to a 4-way joystick. So like I said, now it's gate restricted. You can only move the joystick up, down, left, and right. Red goes back to 8-way. So what's really cool about this option is the fact that you can set that for each game individually. Now, also interesting, iiRcade has done some of the homework for you. So there are certain games, when you download them, they're going to have default configurations already set up as part of the operating system. For instance, Pac-Man. If I went to Pac-Man right now, that gate restrictor thing would be disabled and it would be auto set to on. So every time I go to play Pac-Man, it is always going to turn it into a 4-way gate restrictor. And I think that's a cool feature because it does take some of the guesswork away from for you. But for any of those that do not have that auto configuration, you can set it manually here. Now, the last thing I just want to talk about in the game options is this optical setting. And if I go to this, you'll see you can set up the optical device, which would normally be light gun, mouse spinner, or system trackball. So this is where you would have to set this up for games that use these specific types of controls. Now, unfortunately, that thing for the gate restrictor doesn't seem to hold true for games that would say normally be like a trackball game or a light gun game. There doesn't seem to be any default configuration set up for that, at least none that I've found yet. So for instance, if I have Centipede on here and I want to play Centipede as the trackball, I'm going to set this to system trackball and go back, and then that way the game will automatically be set up to use the trackball to play anytime I want to play it. Now, if it was a light gun game, like say Point Blank or Terminator 2 or something like that, I would set this to light gun, same thing. Then it will automatically recognize if I have a Sinden light gun put in here that it's a light gun game, and to use that as my controls, not, and not default to the joystick. But the last thing I want to touch on real quick with these options is the game downloader. Now, if you have access to your own ROMs, obviously you're able to put them on this machine, whether you put them in internal storage, whether you put them on an SD card, or even whether you put them on, say, a thumb drive or some kind of external device like that and plug it into one of the USB ports in the Viper in the back of the machine. You wouldn't want to plug an external, from my understanding, I don't believe you want to plug external devices or thumb drives into any of these. You would want to use the ones that are actually on the Viper or on the switcher in the back themselves. But if you don't have your own ROMs handy, that's where the game downloader comes in. And going into here, you'll see there's important notice: downloadable games are not hosted by iiRcade servers. They are downloaded from publicly available websites. iiRcade and affiliates are not legally responsible for how you choose to use the game downloader. Do you agree that you will only download the games that you own and are legally entitled to? Obviously, you have to agree or disagree here. If you say no, it takes you out and you're done. If you say yes, that's going to just take you to the game downloader. Now, what I will say to that is that you should technically only be downloading ROMs for games that you legally own. Now, again, just like the disclaimer says, what you choose to do with this is up to you and your own conscience. But you can see here that there are a huge selection of games here. And of course, being that I'm on MAME, this is just a list of games that would be available for the MAME emulator. If I was on Dreamcast or NES or Super NES or any of those, this would be for games that are just specifically to that particular emulator. And of course, you can run through, obviously, there's a huge list of games here. So for instance, let's pick one that I don't have, like say Bagman. It's one I don't have on my system just yet. Let's say I owned this ROM and I wanted to download it. I could just hit the little A button and put a check mark next to that, and then go back. I have one game selected. I'm going to save it to my SD card. Always look at that because it always defaults to internal. So depending on where you want to put it, make sure that you select that properly, and then just say download the game. It's going to download it. It's going to scrape the info, and then it's going to say reload the games list. And again, you have to reload the games list every time. Even if I were putting games on here, whether I take the SD card out, put games on and put it back, or copy them to it from, say, my PC over the network, anytime you come back to the machine, you're going to want to refresh the list before those games will show up. And now you can see if, let me see if I can find it. Where did it put it? Oh, right there, Bagman. There's the game that I just downloaded. Now, real quick, just to show off what I was talking about with that gate restrictor, I'm going to pick a fan favorite here. That's Donkey Kong. If I go into the game options here, you will see that enable gate restrictor is set to built in. I can't change it. That it is what it is. Okay. Now, that may be a good thing. That may be a bad thing. I actually happen to think that's a good thing, that it's built in, that you can't change it. It's automatic. I didn't have to go into this game and check that and turn that on. It was just always going to do it. So now if I launch the game, you'll see that the button just turned blue, and now the gate restrictor is on. So this is set as a 4-way joystick. I cannot go diagonal. I can only go up and down, left and right on this. So while I'm in a game real quick, one thing I want to show you, and as far as I know, this is specific to MAME. Whether or not some of the emulators have internal menus, I'm not totally sure about, but I do like MAME because it does have an internal menu. If I hit the menu here, I'm going to get into this. This is where I can get access to input settings, dip switch settings. So for instance, if I wanted to change the number of lives, at what level of do you get a bonus life, all that kind of cool stuff, I can do that. I can also go to inputs and I can change how upright, down, left, where button 1 is, all that kind of stuff. So if the buttons weren't mapped properly, or if I didn't feel like they were mapped properly, or I didn't like the button layout, I can change that in here. And I have noticed for certain games that I've had a need to do that. For instance, with some of the beat 'em up games, maybe there's an action button, a jump button, and then a third button that does a special move. It seems like that action button wasn't set up properly, so I had to change it. So I had I set them up for ABC, for action, jump, special move, something along those lines. Obviously, you can do it to what works best for you or to make it more arcade accurate, whatever. But there are certain games where you might actually find you need to go in and change some of those settings. Now, under some of the other emulators, like say Dreamcast or Neo Geo or any of those, I haven't figured out a way to get into that. There probably is through RetroArch. I just don't know on here how to do that. Again, that's where the Discords come in handy. So I'm going to have to figure that out at some point because, again, with some of those games, the button layout doesn't feel right to me, and I'd like to be able to change it. And lastly, if I want to get back to my games list, I hold the menu and player 1 button like this. And back we go. All right, so the last thing I want to touch on really in this video is this. This is, of course, a Sinden light gun. Sinden light guns do work with the arcade system, but there are a couple of things that you should be aware of if you're going to use this or if you're thinking about purchasing some to use for your arcade system. Now, if you have the original iiRcade game machine, that obviously did not have USB ports built into it, but with the Viper and the Switcher, you do have access to USB ports on the GRS control panel. And you can see there are 2 right in the front here. They're built right into the control panel. And if you have the gold, you not only have those 2, but the 2 that actually came as part of the gold system as well. Now, it does not really matter where you plug this in. You can plug it into any of the USBs you want on the control panel. On the gold, it doesn't matter. And I gotta make sure I plug it in the right way. There we go. What you're gonna see in a second here is that the gun will be recognized and the border will come up. So be patient because it does take a few seconds before it gets recognized. It's not going to be instantaneous, but you can see here that there is now a white border around the screen. That is what the Sinden gun needs to be able to track the movement. As you can hopefully see here, you can see the little crosshair moving. There's a camera in here. It tracks based on where that border is. Now, I do want to say a couple of things real quick about setup when it comes to Sinden light guns. So I'm going to go into the main menu here and I'm going to go down to input settings, and you're going to see down here is light guns, trackballs, mice, and spinners. And if I go into here, there's a few things here. For instance, one of the things you want to do is you want to go to Sinden settings. Now, what I have found that works for me is there's an option here to say, obviously you have to show the Sinden borders. That's for sure. But there's this option here that says use big Sinden borders. That is, you can see how thick the borders are here. If I turn that off, the border becomes much thinner. Now, my gun had trouble seeing the border that thin. So for me, it worked better to set that to use the big borders. Now, another thing you might have to play around with is light sensitivity. Now, this can be set to from dimmest to brightest. I believe normal is the default setting. I set it 1 up to bright because I guess I had some brightness in here. I don't know if maybe it was from the marquee or things like that, but bright definitely seemed to work better for me. I've heard some people say that setting it to dim works better for them. So this may be a little bit of trial and error before you get it to where it seems to work just right for you. Now, once you have your settings, there are a couple of things for light gun calibration type. You can do it as an offset, or you can do it as screen size. I'm going to be honest, I'm not 100% sure what the real difference is here. It didn't seem to make a difference for me. I just left it at, I believe it was set to screen size. I was playing around with different options and I just left it on offset. But then you can also calibrate the gun. And you'll see it says Sinden Arcade Light Gun 1. That's the Sinden gun that I have plugged in. If I hit the button here, Now it's going to ask me to calibrate. So I'm going to take my gun, I'm going to point it at the center, hit the trigger, point it at the corner, hit the trigger, and that's it. It is not going to make you shoot at all corners, middle, top, left. That's it. That actually confused me a little bit at first. I thought for sure that I would have to do it in all corners, but that seems to be right. And you can see the tracking is actually pretty good on this. Now it does seem that you can plug and unplug the Sinden Guns as much as you want whether you're playing a light gun game or not playing a light gun game. It doesn't seem to affect how well it works. I have heard people say that having the light gun plugged in before they turn the system on seemed to work for them when they were having problems with the Sinden Gun. For me, plugging it and unplugging it doesn't seem to affect. So again, your mileage may vary. Just try different things and see what works for you. Also, when I unplug the gun, the border doesn't go away always right away. It may take a few seconds before the border goes away, although sometimes I have found that if you just kind of move back and forth on the menu, make it refresh the screen for a second, that it'll make the border go away. Now, the last thing I want to say when it comes to the light gun games is there seems to be an issue for button mapping on some of the games. And again, this may be down to the emulator. I know for like Super Nintendo, there's a couple of different emulators that you can use, and one of them map the buttons on the gun. You can see there are buttons on the gun here. There's a little, directional pad on here. One of them seemed to work better than the others. I forget off the top of my head which one it was. I want to say it was like SNES 9X or something like that was the one that worked, whereas a slightly newer emulator didn't seem to, or something like that. In the arcade, I haven't really found a good way to map other buttons. Like say for Terminator 2, I can seem to play Terminator 2 just fine with the Sinden, but the missiles don't seem to launch properly. Or if I do find an emulator where the missiles launch with the button, they don't launch on where the crosshair is. They just launch up to the top of the screen for some reason, top left corner of the screen. It's like it's just stuck there. I haven't figured out why yet. Again, those of you in the Discord, maybe you figured out how to get that to work, or maybe it's a quirk in the emulators that needs to be worked out by iiRcade, but just something to be aware of. Now, a lot of the Sinden games play great, especially if they're just the point and shoot type that don't have extra buttons for missiles or anything like that. But if you're looking for something that has like multi-button functions, you might run into some issues. Again, as always with this stuff, your mileage may vary depending on the emulator you're using, possibly even the system you're using, whether it's the original arcade or the gold. So it's something to keep in mind, but I wanted to mention it as an issue I ran into that I'm still trying to figure out. Now, beyond the quirks with the Sinden Light Gun, I have found a few other little things that I'm trying to figure out. For instance, while Dreamcast does seem to be supported, I did put a few Dreamcast games on here and I've had trouble getting them to run properly. So I'm still trying to figure that out. As I said, like with MAME, it does seem like depending on which emulator you use does help to figure out what games will run and what games won't, but there is going to be some trial and error for that. For any of these that have multiple emulators with them, you may find yourself trying different ones in order to get games to run or to get them to run well or run properly. Again, PlayStation has two different emulators to it. One of them runs the games beautifully. The other one seems to run them a little bit slower, but worked with the light gun, whereas the one that ran the games much smoother didn't seem to pick up the light gun for some reason. So again, it's a trade-off.
Now, another thing I want to bring up, at least on my system, and again, this may not be you. I have the gold. Maybe it's something with the golds. Maybe it's something in general. I'm really not sure. But I have noticed that there's a pretty decent humming coming from the speakers when the machine is just sitting idle. If I'm just on the menu or, not really doing much of anything, there is a humming coming from the speakers. I did try to capture some audio from it, putting my microphone up to it, but for some reason, the audio just didn't come through. Maybe the microphones that I'm using weren't powerful enough to really catch it. Not really sure. But I felt it was something that I needed to mention before the end of the video. When I'm in a game, when I'm playing, when the volume, when the sound is on for games and stuff, I don't notice it at all. It's just when it's kind of sitting idle. And you can see here I was trying to put my microphone up and capture it, and it didn't really come through. But I felt like I needed to mention it because it's something that you may notice as well.
Now, while iiRcade's tagline does seem to be all fun, no work, I can't really say that that's 100% true. Now, while a lot of games do work 100% right out of the box without you really having to do anything, that isn't true for all games. As I said, there are some games that you might have to decide which emulator works better for them. Some, the emulator may not run it at all, whereas others, like I said, you may have to play until you find out which emulator works. Some button mappings don't seem to be 100% correct. The issues that I've had with the Sinden light gun, things of that nature. Now, if you are familiar with emulators, whether you've played an emulator on a computer, whether you've built your own, say, Raspberry Pi, RetroPie type system before, what maybe you're familiar with RetroArch and some of the things that you can do with that. If you're familiar with all of how that works, you will find yourself being able to move around on this with no trouble to overcome some of those issues. But this is not going to be the type of system that you can just throw 1,000 games on it and everything's going to play 100% perfect. You're not going to have any issues trying to figure out how to get them to run properly. Now, had they been able to do that, that would have been an amazing feat, because I don't think anybody's been able to overcome that yet. Even if you're on, say, RetroPie, on a Raspberry Pi, there are still configurations and things you need to figure out per game, things like that. So to have that be here is not a deal breaker at all, but it is something to be aware of. If you're just looking for something you can throw in the back of this, play a bunch of games, and you're not going to have to do anything, any kind of configuration, that is not going to be the case. Like I said, for a lot of the games, it is true. And I love the fact that on certain games, like you saw with Donkey Kong, that the gate restrictor was auto set. And all I had to do was go into the game and it would set it to a 4-way joystick. I didn't have to think about it. I think that is fantastic. Oh, that's the Matrix screensaver. There's a couple of screensavers you can pick from too. But getting back to what I was saying, there are things that you are going to have to be aware of, and there are configurations you may have to do. Like I said, whether it's button configurations, whether it's setting it up to use the trackball as an option in a game where it doesn't do it by default. Things like that are things that you're going to have to be aware of. So there is going to be a little bit of work involved, possibly with each game you put on here, to make sure that it runs 100% exactly the way you want it to. But as I said, that is not a slight on iiRcade. That is the emulator scene in general. I said, had they been able to get this to work 100% out of the box with every game that's out there, no matter the system, that would be an amazing feat. And I can't imagine anybody being able to put the time, effort, and energy in to make sure every single game runs 100% all the time. Because, quite frankly, you can put just about anything you want on this. This is not limited to only the games that iiRcade says will run on it. While they've done a huge amount of work in going through a lot of games, again, I keep pointing to that gate restrictor and the fact that they've got built-in configurations for it. It would be nearly impossible to go through every game possible on every system possible that this could do and make sure every game works 100%. You are going to run into games that aren't going to work, period, no matter what you do. And you're going to run into some games where with a little bit of work and configuration, you can get it to work perfect, where it maybe didn't work as soon as you put it on here or as soon as you downloaded it. So that is not a slight on GRS, Thunderstick Studios, iiRcade, any of that. Like I said, it would have been an incredible feat had they been able to do that. This is just part of the emulator scene in general and something that I wanted to bring up if this is something you're considering. But overall, I am super stoked to have this system set up and have it in my iiRcade. It has brought back to life a system that for the most part was pretty much dead with the demise of the iiRcade company. But to have something where I can switch back and forth from my original iiRcade PCB to the GRS Viper to play the games that I've invested time and money in on my iiRcade, to not lose them by having to gut this and put a PC or a Pi or something in it instead, to have everything contained in one simple system that for the most part is pretty plug and play. I have to say, setting it up is not hard. Again, check out Glenn's videos on how to set this up, whether you have an original iiRcade or the iiRcade Gold. It really doesn't take long. It's not that hard. You don't really need a huge technical know-how to do it. And once it's set up, you are good to go. Said, you will have some issues here and there with certain games, certain emulators, things like that, but that's nothing different than you would if you were putting a Raspberry Pi on this, or even a PC running MAME or any of these other emulators. You would have these same issues. So to have something in a fully contained system that you can just plug in, be ready to go, is an amazing feat, and my hat is off to them. They've done a great job here. And if you own an iiRcade system and you haven't had a chance to pick one of these up yet, I highly recommend it once they're available again. Now, another thing with the switcher is that when you turn the machine off, you'll see the trackball, the gate restrictor, and the KVM switcher all stay lit up. Beyond that, I believe that there is still power going to the monitor as well. I don't know if the monitor is actually on or powered on, but there is still power going to it. So not necessarily a good thing that you want to keep on all the time. So what I have done is I have little power cable right here. This does have a surge protector in it, just in case, although I do have this plugged into a surge protector in the back as well. So when I'm done playing and I shut the machine off, I just come down here and shut off power as well. This is the iiRcade power and power to the USB ports that's plugged into that. And of course, now you can see everything is shut off. But that's going to do it for my look at the KVM iiRcade switcher from GRS. Again, overall, I am so happy that I purchased this. As I said, it did breathe new life into a dead system for me. I am just getting started figuring out all that it's capable of, all the games that I can play on it, so on and so forth. Again, this is not meant to be a comprehensive video on everything that you can or cannot do with this switcher. If you've purchased one for yourself, if you're considering purchasing one, I highly, highly recommend that you join the Retro Center Discord, where they talk about GRS Viper, arcade in general, things of that nature. Maybe join the iiRcade community on Facebook, where you can get a lot of your questions answered. Hopefully this video did answer some questions for you. If you're running into issues, maybe this video did help you figure a couple of those out. If not, that's what the Discord and the Facebook community is for. You can leave me comments below, but there are questions that I'm probably not qualified to answer. So be sure you check out those Discords, because the people in those Discords actually worked on this stuff, so they know what they're talking about. So be sure you check that out if you're interested in purchasing this, or if you have and there are questions you have. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, leave me a thumbs up. Leave me those comments below. And of course, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and do that as well. That's all for now. Thank you so much again for watching. Take care and happy gaming.